Why does this camera look so bad? Are you having class tonight? Hey there.
Hello, Hal.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Bless you.
My allergies are terrible.
Sorry.
Hello, John.
Hi, Sue. My allergies are terrible too.
Oh, even my ears are all plugged.
Yeah. Marion and I were just talking about that the other day. Our allergies, we can't get ahead of it.
Absolutely not. I mean, I take an antihistamine in the morning the way I'm supposed to. I use Flonase the way I'm supposed to. I stay inside as much as I can.
I use the
I'm still
natural
miserable.
honey.
Hmm?
Uh, I use the local honey thing. I've been doing it for about 30 years now. Works fantastic for me.
Yeah,
I
well,
don't think I I don't think I take 3 antihistamines a year anymore.
Well,
yeah,
what I,
well, I was fine until I moved to Boston.
yeah, because you have all the mold spores and all that stuff up
Well,
there.
stuff I'm not used to.
Yeah. But Harold, the we don't have your South Carolina honey in Oklahoma.
No, but you need to get Oklahoma honey.
You need local honey.
It has to be local honey.
I had one very bad year in South Carolina, but only one, and this is the worst I can ever remember.
And
Coughing and sneezing and blowing my nose
yeah,
and just runny eyes and blocked ears and just awful.
well, I'll tell you what, Sue, don't feel bad. I use more eye drops than you can shake a stick at. My eyes are burning most of the afternoon. I don't take antihistamines anymore. I take citrazine, which is not an antihistamine, and take one in the morning like you obviously do. But still nothing will get ahead of it. And I never used to have an allergy. Never.
I
No,
didn't
I didn't
until I
either.
moved to the South. And then it took about 5 years, and I was going through boxes and boxes. And I kept hearing about the honey thing. And the first time I tried it, it took too much honey, and the allergies reaction was worse.
Yeah.
And then I backed off on it, and that's all I do now.
Wow. That's
I
great.
do about a tablespoon either once a week or twice a week.
Is that all?
That's all.
Wow. Well, maybe it's not too late for me.
But
Paul,
when I first
It
did
has
it,
to be local honey.
yeah,
yes,
be South Carolina honey.
unpasteurized local honey.
Okay. Paul,
And
I was going to say, Paul had such bad allergies when we lived in Chicago. He had to have like a rotor-rooter in his nose. And boy, I felt so sorry. He was about 10, 12 years old. Man,
yep.
that was awful.
But yeah, a lot of times I take it in a glass of hot tea,
Hmm.
like twice a week. But lately I've been doing it. I usually have oatmeal and chia seeds and flax at least once to twice a week. So now I put it in my oatmeal.
You and I have a
That tastes
similar
good.
diet, but I don't have the honey.
Well, you would need Oklahoma honey anyway.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to be in Oklahoma much longer.
You'll be back in Texas.
Be back in Texas. Hopefully,
Texas
you
honey.
won't follow me.
But I didn't have allergy problems at all on Long Island growing up. But
Really?
when I moved here, man, they started. And then finally I swapped over to this honey thing, and it was like, and I was doing like a tablespoon every night. And all of a sudden my eyes were bulging, they were tearing, I was sneezing, stuffed up. And so I actually like immersed myself in it so bad. And there you go, you got a dermatologist there. Uh, I immersed
He's
that
not a
about.
dermatologist. He's not a dermatologist.
Well, not no, that's right. You did.
He's an asthma specialist.
Oh, I didn't. I've thought the wrong thing then for years.
Isn't that right, Fred?
Yeah, asthma and allergy, basically. Yeah.
Well, maybe I am having the worst allergy season I have ever had in my life. I
Really?
can't stop sneezing. My eyes are tearing, my ears are all plugged. I'm just absolutely miserable. And this has been going on since the trees started to leaf out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes.
But you've never had this before?
Well, I had it 1 year in South Carolina,
Hmm.
but never again. And I've never had it here before. This is apparently something this year triggered it.
Yeah,
And
it's odd. Yeah.
I take an antihistamine, a 24-hour one every morning, and I use Flonase when my nose is really stuffed. And I stay
Hmm.
inside as much as I can, but it has not helped much.
Okay. Well, one of the things you need to do, Flonase doesn't work when your nose is stuffed
Okay,
because it's a preventive medication.
okay,
You have to use it every day on a regular basis because once your nose is stuffed, it can't really penetrate very far anyway. So
okay.
you have to really start it on a good day and keep it up, through the whole season. Okay.
Well,
But
I don't think
anyway,
that would help my eyes.
it may actually, because when
Really?
your nose gets plugged up enough, tears don't drain properly from your eyes into your nose, and that causes a secondary eye irritation.
Well, Fred,
Okay.
I keep putting eye drops in my eyes because they burn so badly. I'm just
Mhm.
that's a byproduct of the allergy, isn't it?
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway.
Okay. I got emails from Chris and Rachel. They're not going to be able to make it tonight, so it's
Oh, okay.
basically us. Okay.
All
Um,
right.
so um, it's a pretty good part. It's a big portion. It's called Show Team Judges, and it's Deuteronomy chapter 16, starting with verse 18.
Chapter 16 in Deuteronomy. Since I missed a class, I'm in the wrong place.
Okay. Yeah, chapter 6,
Deuteronomy 16, verse what?
I got
uh,
16.
verse, verse, starting with verse 18.
18.
You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribe and for tribes
That's
in all
it.
the
Yeah.
settlements that the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. You shall not judge unfairly. You shall
He's
not.
reading it already.
Yeah.
Well, she jumped right in there.
You
That's
shall
because
Yeah.
not
she's
Go,
got
judge
all
go
these
for it.
unfairly. You
allergies.
shall show no partiality. You shall take no bribes, for bribes blind the eyes of the discerning and upset the plea of the judge. Justice, justice, justice shall you pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You
Yeah.
shall
Stop,
not.
stop,
Well,
stop there. That's the
Okay.
end of that part, actually. Okay. You really hit the ground running.
Boy.
Well, I didn't want anybody
Okay.
to get in ahead of me.
Right. Okay.
nobody did.
Yeah. Yeah. The first three verses, basically the need to have judges and officers. But that kind of raises a question. Now, who are these judges and officers? Who appointed them? We know that the priests, as far as religious questions, the priests were the ones that had the authority. But it's not really clear, who appointed the judges and officers. Unknown caller. There's one theory that they were tribal elders. It could be that. The other was, when you get to the period of the monarchy, probably the king appointed judges and officers. But the Bible never really spells it out anywhere, who these people were and how they got chosen.
Fred, I've
Mhm.
often thought that at this time period, the 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 rabbis were like the leaders of the community, and then they had the elders, which were part of that leadership. And it's not like we talk about separation of government and all of that. That
Mhm.
the religion, the rabbis, and the community were all one big part.
Yeah.
And maybe I
Although,
didn't say that quite well, but
yeah.
but
Although this far back, there wouldn't have been any rabbis. There were no rabbis during the biblical period.
in
Um,
Deuteronomy,
yeah, I mean,
really,
as far as I know, there were no rabbis really until the Greco-Roman period. So, yeah, there is one clue though, that way back in Exodus, we read this episode in Exodus where Moses' father-in-law Jethro, the Midianite, comes to visit him, when they're in the Sinai desert, and he sort of watches Moses, working from day to day, and he tells him, you're taking too much on yourself. You're trying to do too much. You have to have a structure, people you can delegate. I think he said you have to have captains of 100, captains of 50, captains of 20, and so forth. So we know there was a system of magistrates appointed by Moses, and it may be still referring to them. We don't really know later on how
Well,
judges were chosen.
is it God talking to Moses? You shall appoint magistrates, or is it
Yeah.
God talking to the everybody?
Well, that's interesting because often you don't really know. If you look at the first sentence when it says, "Judges and officers shall you make for yourself in all your gates," the "you" is singular. You can in English you can be singular or plural. So you often can't tell when somebody says you whether you mean you group or you singular. But Hebrew grammar you can. It's
In the
very
South,
clear.
they can. It's you or
Y'all,
y'all.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And here the you is singular, so you can make a case that this is Moses, this is God talking to Moses, and that Moses is going to appoint these judges and officers. So. And then the expression "in thy gates," it's a very common biblical expression because a city of any importance in that would have a wall around it, and there would be at least one gate, in the entrance. And as you came into the gate, there'd be this large open space where all the business of the city was conducted. The courts were held there. The merchant would set up their booth there on market days. Every public event would be in that square inside the gate, and so the Bible often uses that idiom, the gate, to describe the justice system or the economic system, or the whole society as a whole.
But well, this is completely consistent with the Ten Commandments, what's taking place here. So
Yeah,
it's like God expanding expanding to Moses upon the Ten Commandments, say, hey, you got to have these things in place to have an orderly society.
well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, if you look at the Ten Commandments to say the basic Constitution, you still have to have all the Supreme Court decisions to go
Yeah.
into you got to fill in all these nitty gritty details of how life is going to be conducted. Um, and here, the commandment is again that you shall not respect persons. The little Hebrew is you shall not recognize faces. And the idea is that you should not be intimidated by the rich, and you should not feel sorry for the poor. You shouldn't decide in someone's favor just because he's poor. Um, in fact, there's a rabbinic legend about a judge who had a poor man in his court who was charged with something, and the judge felt that he was guilty and laid a heavy fine on him. And then, as soon as he had pronounced sentence, he asked everybody in the courtroom to contribute to the man could pay the fine. So, in other words, you have an obligation to help the poor, but not to pervert justice for them. The verdict has to be a true verdict, regardless of the person. Then going over to chapter 17, I'm going to skip a little bit because it's a really long parsha.
Okay.
Here they talk about the penalty for idolatry, and that's in chapter 17 from verse 2 through verse 7, if someone wants to read that.
I'll
Sure.
do it. Not verse 1, huh?
No, no, that belongs really to the previous part.
Okay. If there is found among you in one of the settlements that your God is given you, a man or woman who has affronted your God and transgressed the covenant, turning to the worship of other gods and bowing down to them, to the sun or to the moon or any of the heavenly hosts, something I never commanded, and you have informed or have learned of it, then you shall take a thorough inquiry. If it is true, fact is established that abhorrent thing was perpetrated in Israel, you shall take the man or the woman who did that wicked thing out to the public place, and you shall stone that man or woman to death. A person shall be put to death only on the testimony of two or more witnesses. Yep, here comes your multiple boundaries. No one shall be put to death on the testimony of a single witness. Let the hands of the witness to be the first to put the condemned to death, followed by the hands of the rest of the people. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst.
So the penalty for idolatry is death, which probably was never really carried out. As you know, centuries later, you have the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all these guys carrying on about all the idolatry that's going on. So apparently, making an example of a few people didn't help, or else the law was never strictly followed. Because one of the things, though, is the requirement of two witnesses. When you think about it, if you can only convict somebody of anything, and actually later rabbis extended this to that you can't convict anybody of anything, whether it's murder, theft, adultery, whatever, except with at least two witnesses. And how often does somebody commit a crime in front of two witnesses? So,
Yeah.
the two witness requirements would make it extremely difficult to get any kind of conviction. And that was an error, where all the forensic stuff we have now, fingerprints, DNA, hair and fiber analysis, phone records, financial records, security camera footage, all the law and order stuff, none of that was there. So basically, either two witnesses saw you do it, or that you weren't going to be convicted. So as long as you were worshiping idols quietly in your own house, you were probably okay.
Oh,
Unless your
okay.
family presented you before the court.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know,
unless your family ratted you out. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
We saw mom and dad.
Had the sun got out.
Yeah. Well, and again, the witnesses who testified to get the conviction have to be the ones to throw the first stones, which a lot of the rabbis believe will sort of inhibit them from giving false testimony. If you have to be the one who actually does the execution, you might think twice about accusing somebody if you weren't absolutely sure. And of course, there's an example of that in the New Testament. Remember the episode in the Gospels where a woman has been convicted of adultery, and this crowd is getting ready to stone her. And then Jesus said, "Let him who was without sin throw the first
Yes.
stone." And everybody kind of backs off at that point.
But this really expands on what we just read, though, in terms of the fact
Mhm.
that the community was being held to uphold the Ten Commandments. Absolutely. This,
Yeah,
yeah. And I think we've talked about this before. All through time, there's always been a tendency to drift away from uh, God to some of these other more shiny objects. Let's put it that way.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And again, if
And God's been trying to bring us back to true north.
yeah. If you define idolatry as making anything the primary value in your life other than God, then idolatry is still pretty widespread
Oh
everywhere.
yeah, yeah,
So, this is one reason, probably if they had really followed the death penalty for idolatry, there might be 30 or 40 Jews left in the world today. So it's just as well they didn't enforce it really
yeah.
strictly. Um, but then they go on with the judicial system, starting with verse 8. And in 8 through 13, if they talk about how to handle a difficult case. Somebody
Okay.
want to read 8 through
Yeah. If
13?
any case arises acquiring decision between one kind of homicide and another, one one kind of legal right and another, one kind of assault and another, any case within your towns that is too difficult for you, then you shall arise and go up to the place that the Lord your God will choose, and you shall come to the Levitical priests and to the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall consult them, and they shall declare to you the decision. Then you shall do according to what they declare to you from that place that the Lord will choose, and you shall be careful to do according to all that they direct you, according to the instructions that they give you, and according to the decision that they pronounce to you, and you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the verdict that they declare to you, either to the right hand or to the left. The man who acts presumptively by not obeying the priest who stands to minister there before the Lord your God, or to judge, that man shall die. You shall purge the evil from Israel, and all the people shall hear and fear, and not act presumptuously again.
Yeah. So that makes it sound like there were lower courts and higher courts.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like, if whatever the primary court was couldn't come to a decision,
Yeah.
then you passed it up. But again, it says the priest or the judge who is in those days. So we know about the priests, but who the supreme judge would be, the judge who would hear it on the higher level. But again, they never spell it out. So we
But it,
really don't have a good picture of how the system really worked in those days.
but it also says, Fred, that you shall go to the place that your God will choose.
Which
That,
you would assume would be the temple.
yeah, that's what I was going to say. That
Exactly.
place is that chosen place, which is a temple.
Yeah. So, which makes it, which obviously the priest is going to be there. And again, this judge, we really just don't know. Um, and then they changed the subject totally, and they're talking about if you want to have a king. Again, there's no commandment to have a king. And you remember later on, the people come to Samuel, the book of Samuel, and say, "We want a king." And Samuel says, "No, you don't want a king. God is your king." And they say, "No, we want a king." And they finally get one. But here, actually, they're anticipating that. And there's a section on, what to do, how to handle things if you have a king. And that's verses 14 through 20. Somebody wants to read that.
I'll read again.
Okay.
If after you have entered the land that your God has assigned to you and taken possession of it and settled in it, you decide, I will set a king over me, as do all the nations about me. You shall be free to set a king over yourself, one chosen by your God. Be sure to set as king over yourself one of your own people. You must not set a foreigner over you who is not your kin. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses, since God has warned you, you must not go back that way again. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this teaching written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priest. Let it remain with him, and let him read it all his life, so that he may learn to revere his God, to observe faithfully every word of this teaching, as well as these laws. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows, or deviate from the instruction to the right or to the left, to the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel.
Yeah. So what he's saying is, if you have a king, number one, it said, "You shall set a king whom the Lord your God shall choose." So the choosing, would have to be by a prophet. And that's how you got Saul. The prophet Samuel, God told the prophet Samuel, anoint Saul. And then later tells him, Saul is screwed up, we made a mistake, anoint David. So so Samuel is actually speaking for God, in that case. Um, verse 16, he shall not multiply horses. And in those days, horses were fairly uncommon and very expensive. And the only time they were really used was in war, to pull chariots. Or an occasional very rich person might have one, just to show off his wealth. So multiplying horses really means increasing the defense budget, essentially. Um, and Or caused the people to return to Egypt. And again, Egypt was known for breeding horses. They were the place in the Middle East where you went for the best horses. And so that fits in with that. Um, and then verse 17, neither shall he multiply wives to himself. Obviously, Solomon didn't get the message on that. He was probably, yeah, between his wives and concubines, he may have been at
Yeah.
three figures. So that didn't work. Nor shall he greatly multiply silver or gold, which again, Solomon broke all the rules with that. The other thing is, though, that he has to have a scroll of the Torah with him. And the Hebrew is a little bit obscure here. There's one interpretation of that, that the king has to write his own copy of the Torah. Um, and again, we don't know for sure whether the Torah here, which really means the instruction, just refers to Deuteronomy, or whether it's the entire five books of Moses. We really don't know. But the idea really is sort of that it's going to be a constitutional monarchy. In other words, the king is limited by the Torah. There is a constitution, which is the Torah, and the king should be bound by that. Although, as we see in practice, it didn't work out that way. There were some pretty evil people that ended up as kings of Israel. And the other requirement, he says that it has to be somebody native born. You can't make an outsider your king, which is sort of like what we have. Our president has to be a native born citizen.
Mhm.
A naturalized foreigner cannot be elected president. So this is sort of the same thing.
Do you think that where it says he shall write himself in a book, a copy of this law, what we've been reading about is kind of an expansion of the Ten Commandments. In other words, the practical application of it in the
Yeah.
court and who appoints the judges and all that. Is that what that's referring to? Not just the Torah per se.
Yeah, well, again, it really depends how you want to define Torah. Basically, later on, it became a big thing of contention. In the Greco-Roman period, you had the Sadducee party, mainly the priests, but who were saying that the law is the five books of Moses. There's nothing else can be added to it, it's to be read literally. And then you have the Pharisees, the rabbinic party, that said no, so it has to be interpreted, and we're the people who interpret it. It's very much like, when a lawyer talks about the Constitution, he's not just talking about the document that got written in 1787. He's talking about that, plus the 25 amendments that have been added to it, plus 250 years of Supreme Court decisions.
Mhm.
That's really all part of the Constitution. And the same way, according to the rabbis, the Torah is not just the five books of Moses. It's the five books of Moses, but all the generations of rabbinic interpretation of it, that's also Torah. But again, it's kind of interesting. If you look at the books of Samuel and Kings, which describe the careers of all the kings of Judah and Israel. Well, they never mention um, any king carrying a Torah scroll around with them. In
Mhm.
fact, actually, there's this episode in Kings when King Josiah is ruling Judah, and they're doing some renovations on the temple. And one of the priests comes in with a scroll saying, we found this. We were knocking down a wall, to make repairs. and we found this scroll of the law, and which suggests to some of the commentators that maybe the law was lost for a while and then found again. We don't really know what that scroll was that they brought to King Josiah, but we know that he made a lot of religious reforms in the kingdom, based on that scroll.
But I
Well,
thought during this time period, a lot of it was verbal recollection because writings were scarce.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't really know when the five books of Moses were written down. They're called the five books of Moses because, the tradition is that Moses wrote them, which is a little bit dicey, because there's a description of his own death there, which is kind of hard for anybody to write. And there were some other rabbis who said, well, he wrote everything except the last chapter of Deuteronomy, which describes his death. Um, Most people believe that it was written probably several generations later, but nobody knows exactly when. The consensus among Bible scholars was that by the time of the Babylonian exile, which is the 6th century BCE, the five books of Moses had been written down and were available. And most of the rest of the Bible was written during the Babylonian exile or in a couple of generations after it. But we'll probably never know exactly what the timing is in any of this stuff.
no. But Fred, what to me this point here is fairly interesting. There's a segment says not having so many wives, but then it's real
Mhm.
specific about horses. In other words, something that's you would
Mhm.
think would be very specific. Not so many wives. Does that mean 10, or does that mean 1,000, or is that
Yeah, it doesn't say,
Yeah, it doesn't
but
say, but
yeah,
very specifically, but specific about a horse.
yeah. The only kings that we have numbers for, I think David had four wives, or it might have been five. I'm not sure. The only guy who really, was obviously over the limit was Solomon. And even the rabbinic commentary was Solomon disobeyed God by marrying all these foreign women, letting them bring their pagan cults, into Jerusalem. And the rabbis actually used Solomon. They said we're not questioning his wisdom, but it shows that even a wise man can be diverted, by sexual desire or whatever, and got off the track, and cost of that.
Yeah.
Okay, then going over to chapter 18, then they come back to the subject of the Levites, and basically there's really nothing new there. It's verses 1 through 8, basically, which just reminds everybody that the Levites are not going to have any land of their own, and therefore, they have to be supported by the rest of the people. And we've already had that several times before. Um, and then they have an interesting thing about what to do about soothsayers and sorcerers, and that's verses 9 through 14. Somebody wants to read that.
When you come into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominable practices of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who burns his son or his daughter as an offering, anyone who practices divination or tells fortunes or interprets omens, or a sorcerer or a charmer or a medium or a necromancer
Yeah,
or one who inquires of the dead, for whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord, and because of those abominations, the Lord your God is driving them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God, for these nations which you are about to dispossess listen to the fortune tellers and the diviners. uh, but as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do this.
yeah. And again, this seems to be not that they're saying that talking to the dead and having seances and whatnot is just a just a scam. Apparently, they really believe that these people did have magical powers, but you're not supposed to have anything to do with them. Is one episode in the book of Samuel, where King Saul it's the night before a major battle with the Philistines, and he's worried about the outcome. He needs advice, and he goes to this witch, the witch of Endor, and she actually conjures up the spirit of Samuel who talks to him. So apparently, the Bible believes that you really could do these things. You could talk to the dead. You could predict the future. This kind of thing. So it's not that it's a con, but it's something that you just can't do. Um, so it's forbidden that way.
And that's still true today. There's a lot of people that are into those kinds of activities,
Yeah.
whether it's
Yeah. Well, every newspaper has your daily horoscope
your
in it.
daily horoscope,
Oh, I
or
haven't seen
or
that in a
go to
long
a
time.
fortune teller.
We were in a place in Asheville, and in the back corner of this little shop, there was a lady telling the fortune to this young couple.
Mhm. Yeah, it's still very, very popular, and a lot of people
Yeah.
still believe in it. Um, and then he sort of moves on to a little bit different subject, which is how do you tell the true prophets from the false prophets?
Yeah.
And that's verses 15 through 22. Um, Hey,
Okay.
well, you guys have been doing all the work. I'll read those verses. Give you a break.
Oh, I don't mind,
Um,
Fred. I'd do it.
Okay, go ahead.
From among your own people, your God will raise up for you a prophet like myself. That is whom you shall heed. This is just what you asked of your God at Horeb on the day of assembly, saying, let me not hear the voice of my God any longer, or see this wondrous fire any more, lest I die. Whereupon God said to me, they have done well in speaking thus. I will raise up for them from among their own people a prophet like yourself, in whose mouth I will put my words, and who will speak to them that I command. And anybody who fails to heed the words of the prophet, speaks in my name, I myself will call to account. But any prophet who presumes to speak in my name an oracle that I did not command to be uttered, or speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. And you should ask yourselves, how can we know that the oracle was not spoken by God? If the prophet speaks in the name of God and the oracle does not come true, that oracle was not spoken by God. The prophet has uttered it presumptuous. Do not stand in dread of that person.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, that still doesn't really answer the question how you tell the true prophets from the false. Because often the prophet, will be prophesying something in the distant future. Like Isaiah was predicting that, the Jerusalem would eventually be destroyed and people would go into exile because of their sins. But it didn't happen until about 150 years after his time. So, and it's still basically a question like we have even today. Do you listen to the Fox News prophets or the MSNBC prophets? It's
Very good, Fred.
how do you know who to listen to?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm sure there are plenty of people walking around Jerusalem, saying, "Thus saith the Lord," with their own agenda. And the rabbis say there are two types of false prophets. There's one basically who really feels that God is talking to him. He really thinks that he senses what God's purpose is, even though God has not spoken to him. And so he's acting in good faith in a sense, telling the people what he thinks God has said to him. And then there's the other guy who really is kind of a charlatan, who basically is just making it up. He has his own agenda. And he figures if he prefaces everything he says with "Thus saith the Lord," it'll just have more weight.
Hmm.
And that will continue to move forward through our generations and
It
probably the
will,
next
yeah,
generations to
yeah.
come.
And telling the
Yeah.
truth from the false prophets, that's
Yeah.
nobody has solved that one yet.
Yeah.
No. And then chapter
Mm.
19, they go off again on a different subject, and these are the cities of refuge, and that's verses 1 through 13 on chapter 19. Sue, you want to
Okay.
read that?
Sure. When the Lord your God has cut down the nations whose land the Lord your God is assigning you, and you have disposed them and settled into their towns and homes, you shall set aside 3 cities in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. You shall survey the districts, the distances, and divide into 3 parts the territories of the country that the Lord your God has allocated to you, so that any manslaughter may have a place to flee to. Now, this is the case of the manslayer who may flee there and live, one who has killed another unwittingly without having been his enemy in the past. For instance, a man goes with his neighbor into a grove to cut wood. As his hand swings the axe to cut down the tree, the axe head, the axe head flies off the handle and strikes the other so that he dies. The man shall flee to one of these cities and live. Otherwise, when the distance is great, the blood avenger pursuing the manslaughterer in hot anger may overtake him and kill him. Yet he did not incur the death penalty, since he has never been the other's enemy. This is why I command you to set aside 3 cities. And when the Lord your God enlarges your territory as he swore to your fathers and gives you all the land that he promised to give your fathers, if you faithfully observe all this instruction that I enjoin you upon this day, to love the Lord your God and to walk in his ways at all times, then you shall add 3 more towns to these 3. Thus the blood of the innocent will not be shed, bringing blood guilt upon you in the land that the Lord your God is allocating to you. If, however, a person who is an enemy of another lies in wait for him and sets upon him and strikes him a fatal blow, and then flees to one of these towns, the elders of this town shall have him brought back from there and shall hand him over to the blood avenger to be put to death. You must show him no pity, for thus you will preserve Israel of the blood of the innocent, and it will go well with you all of your days.
Yeah. So basically, this was a society, where actually, if somebody in your family was killed, some one of your relatives, had to be the avenger. And the Bible calls the avenger of blood. You know, uh, you killed one of our people. One of our people is going to kill you. Personal vengeance. And the cities basically are not sanctuary cities. I mean, you can't just go there if you deliberately murdered somebody and you're safe in there. Basically, all it does is it 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 allows a judicial process to take place. You get to one of these cities, and there you can be tried, and the judges can decide, whether it was an accidental death or whether it was a premeditated murder. And again, if it's a premeditated murder, then they basically toss you out, and
Yeah, but you got to
and
have 2 witnesses, and now you're in another town.
yeah, yeah, you're right. What you wonder how the court actually decides with this. You're in a town that may be 20 miles away from where this occurred, and I guess they'll probably have to look for witnesses. So as I said, these are the kind of things. I mean, how often do you ever have 2 eyewitnesses to a murder?
Yeah. Well, and the example using head of an axe slipping off and
Mhm.
accidentally killing someone. This sounds like it's the forerunner for our modern judicial system.
Yeah, it is. I mean, basically,
You
this
know,
at work would be what we would call negligent homicide.
yeah, yeah,
If the guy didn't check the axe to make sure that it would put together properly,
sure.
or if you believe it's a total accident, then there might be no charges at
No
all.
charge, yeah.
So, yeah,
I mean, it's
Like
interesting the
shooting
way
the
that,
stunt person by accident because he didn't know the gun was loaded.
right.
yeah, all of the
Yeah,
above.
yeah,
But it sounds like attorneys laying the groundwork for all those arguments, Harold.
yeah, true. Yeah. Okay. And then there's verse 14 is kind of a little thing all by itself. It says, "Thou shalt not remove thy neighbor's landmark. which they of old time have set, in thine inheritance which thou shalt inherit, and the land the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it. So, which makes sense. I mean, obviously, land was very important in those days, and moving the marker between your property and somebody else's, would be a major thing. It's interesting, but later rabbis of the Talmud kind of expanded on that, and they actually um, blew up this concept of not moving the marker is not doing anything that interferes with your neighbor's business or his profession. Anything you do, to interfere with him making a living would be considered moving the landmark. So they actually expanded that whole concept in Talmudic law. And then they
Well,
go back again to this whole, with verse 15, they go back again to this whole thing about requiring the two witnesses. So if somebody wants to read 15 through 21.
yeah. A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of two witnesses or of three witnesses shall a charge be established. If a malicious witness arises to accuse a person of wrongdoing, both parties of the dispute shall appear before the Lord. Before the priests and judges who are in office in those days, the judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then you shall do to him as he has meant to do to his brother. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear, and shall never again commit any such evil among you. Your eye shall not pity. It shall be life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot.
Yeah. So actually, that's kind of a cool thing. In other words, if somebody falsely accuses someone and it's shown that he was falsely accusing him, then what the penalty would have been for that crime, that witness will be subjected to. So, and then the very last one, of course, is often quoted: life for life, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The life for life, it's true. Yeah, the Torah requires the death penalty for murder. There's no getting around that. The other things are the eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The later rabbinic take on that was the value of an eye for an eye, the value of a tooth for a tooth. So, in other words, if I put out your eye, you don't get to put out my eye, but you do have to pay compensation. What we would call tort law. If I injure you, you don't get to injure me in the same way, but I do have to pay you compensation for the injury. And this was the rabbinic interpretation of this eye for an eye business. Although you do see people, interpreting this as a sort of a revenge thing. I get to do to you what you did to me. But that's really not the way the rabbis of the Talmud interpreted it.
Isn't that something that uh, in the Middle East, among the Muslims, is still a dominant thing where if you kill somebody, that the senior member of the family is obligated to track you down and
Yeah, a lot of that is still personal justice. Yeah. And again, even here, there's still an element of that. Because, for instance, the guy flees to the city of refuge, but the court there decides that he did commit murder, that he did
yeah.
it. And they don't execute him. They just kick him out of the city so that the avenger from the victim's family can kill him. So in a sense, even then, this is still not what we would consider, due process. This is still kind of individual vengeance, even here. But you're right, it's still done in some Muslim communities in the Middle East. I mean,
Hmm.
if somebody killed, it's a family thing. The state is not supposed to be
Yeah.
involved. if the honor of your family's involved, you take care of it yourself.
Mhm.
And
Then with
Brad,
chat,
isn't
yeah,
there a lot of honor killing? Um, you know, of you read where families killed a daughter because she dishonored the family.
yeah, yeah. And it still happens, even though, most Muslim countries have civil law against it, but it still goes on. It's a very deeply entrenched kind of tradition in some of these societies.
Well, and I think it even carries over to, I guess, our European heritage, or is it, a parent says to their child, don't dishonor the family and get bad grades in school.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to put it in the kind of
Yeah,
language that I remember.
yeah, we don't carry it quite so far, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, then chapter 20 is it again, this is just sort of a grab bag of different unrelated subject, which is very typical of the Bible. But chapter 20 is kind of interesting. It's rules for war, and basically who can be exempted when you go to war. And this is verses 1 through 9 in chapter 20. Someone wants to read that.
Okay.
When you go out to war against your enemies and see horses and chariots and in an army larger than your own, you shall not be afraid of them. For the Lord your God is with you, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And when you draw near to the battle, the priest shall come forward and speak to the people, and shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, today you are drawing near for battle against your enemies. Let not your heart faint. Do not fear or panic or be in dread of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you the victory. Then the officers shall speak to the people, saying, Is there any man who has built a new house and has not dedicated it? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in the battle and another man dedicate it. And is there any man who has planted a vineyard and has not enjoyed its fruit? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in battle and another man enjoy the fruit. And is there any man who has betrothed a wife and has not taken her? Let him go back to his house, lest he die in battle and another man take her. And the officers shall speak further to the people and say, Is there any man who is fearful and faint hearted? Let him go back to the house, to his house, lest he make the heart of his fellows melt like his own. And when the officers have finished speaking to the people, then commanders shall be appointed at the head of the people. When you
So,
draw,
no, stop at that
okay,
point. Yeah, so basically these are the draft exemptions, which is
yeah,
really a pretty liberal policy. I mean, anybody who's just built a house or just gotten engaged to a girl or has just planted a vineyard,
Or
doesn't
is
have to go to the war. And
or
the
is
last one,
just afraid.
yeah, you're
yeah,
just
just
afraid.
afraid, yeah,
I mean, somebody can actually apparently just say, "I'm scared. I don't want to fight," and they'll just tell them go home. Of course, I think what will be against that, though, is you can imagine the reputation you would have among your neighbors.
yeah,
I think a lot of people would think twice before they did that. Although it does make sense if you have somebody who really just paralyzed with fear, can't help it. It does undermine the morale of the people around him. So you just assume would not have him in the unit.
hmm
The
Well, I
other
think
thing is,
it's interesting too how the stage is set with this. You're going before an army greater than what your resources are.
Mhm,
And they're laying out, hey, if you can't contribute to this or you have these other issues, you,
mhm.
we need to have people that are willing to fight and die.
Yeah. The other thing which the Bible emphasizes over and over again, that basically it's God who decides the battle. It's not how brave your soldiers are or how clever your commanders are. It's basically it doesn't matter what the odds are. If God gives them into your hands, you win.
That's
If He
right.
doesn't, you lose. In fact, there's actually, in the best examples in the book of Judges, where Gideon is going to fight the Midianites, and he has this army of several thousand men he's gotten together, and God says, "Send them all home except for 300." What kind of commander deliberately reduces the size of his army going into battle? And the idea is that God wants to emphasize that He doesn't need thousands of people to beat the Midianites. If God ordains it, they're going to win, and He
Yeah.
wants to make sure this is because God gave you the victory, not because of your superior numbers. And then interesting, the very last verse is after, they've exempted all these people, where it said in verse 9, and it shall be when the officers have made an end of speaking to the people, that the captains of hosts shall be appointed at the head of the people. So apparently this is not a regular standing army like we have. This is sort of whenever a threat comes up, we have to fight somebody. You sort of put together a militia and you
Yeah, I was
choose
going to
your
say it's
officers.
yeah, it's a community militia, and then there's somebody that's going to have to be the head of it.
Yeah, and actually that happened in our own history, the Civil War, where you mobilized thousands of people, but we didn't really have very many experienced officers.
Mm-mm.
There were a few people that were West Point graduates and had fought in the Mexican War, a couple of decades before. But basically, they took ordinary people without military experience, and companies would elect their officers.
Sounds like our latest cabinet.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I
Okay.
digress.
But that was is that traditional through history, Fred, about electing your officers? What
Well,
happened
no, I mean,
in Europe? That wasn't the case.
oh no, it wasn't really. And basically, it's only really where you don't have a regular standing army,
Yeah.
which apparently was the case then. There wasn't a regular army. When there was a need for it, you recruited a whole bunch of people, and they chose their leaders. I don't know anybody. Of course, in the modern world, that's no longer done. I mean, every nation has a military
Yeah.
establishment, so. You may draft a lot more people in war, but you already have the command structure already there. It's a permanent thing. And then there are two other things that they take up here. One is the rule of war when you're conquering a city, and that's verses 10 through 20. Anybody want to read that?
When you approach a town to attack it, you shall offer it in terms of peace. If it responds peacefully and lets you in, all the people present there shall serve you at forced labor. If it does not surrender to you, but would join battle with you, you shall lay siege to it. And when your God delivers it into your hand, you shall put all of its males to the sword. However, you may, however, take as your booty the women, the children, the livestock, and everything in the town, all its spoil, and enjoy the use of the spoil of your enemy which God gives you. Thus you shall deal with all towns that lie very far from you. Towns do not belong to the nations hereabout. In the towns of the latter peoples, however, with which your God is giving you as a heritage, you shall not let a soul remain alive.
Mm.
No, you must prescribe them. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivitites, and the Jebusites, as your God has commanded you, lest they lead you into doing all the aberrant things that they have done for their gods, and you shall stand guilty before your God. When in your war against a city, you have to besiege it in a long time in order to capture it. You must not destroy its trees, wielding the axe against them. You may eat of them, but you must not cut them down. As trees of the field, human to withdraw before you into the besieged city. Once only trees that you know do not yield food may be destroyed. You may cut them down for construction of siege works against the city that is waging war on you until it has been reduced.
So, this sounds like a really bloodthirsty kind of approach. Kill them all. But actually, we know that this never happened because centuries later, the prophets are denouncing the Israelites for taking up all these pagan customs for the pagans that are living among them. So we know that this never happened. You know, but, um, but it sounds brutal. But again, we know that basically the Canaanites were still in the land all the way through, and all these other people. And the Bible talks about them, centuries later. So this never really was followed to the letter. Um, and then the very last one is one of the to me, one of the most fascinating passages of the Bible. And this is chapter 21, 1 through 9. That kind of finishes off the Parsha. Somebody want to read that?
If in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess, someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and is not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall come out, and they shall measure the distance to the surrounding cities, and the elders of the city that is nearest to the slain man shall take a heifer that has never been worked and that has not pulled in a yoke, and the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to a valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. And then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to bless in the name of the Lord, and by their word every dispute and every assault shall be settled. And the elders of that city nearest to the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer, whose neck has been broken in the valley, and they shall testify, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Accept atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you shall have redeemed, and do not set the guilt of innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, so that their blood guilt be atoned for. So you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord.
That's a fascinating custom. But it is basically, here is a guy who's been murdered, and nobody has any idea who did it. But these people who are innocent, have to go through this kind of atonement ceremony. And the idea seems to be that if an innocent man is killed, in your jurisdiction, it contaminates the whole society. Um, and so, and it's, you may be saying, well, why didn't we keep the city safer so this thing didn't happen? And, the whole society has to take responsibility for this. It's really a fascinating idea. And it's obvious, it's interesting the way it's right after this other one about besieging a city. First you get these rules about what to do when you take the city, which is, basically kill them all. And, something you'd expect from a bunch of Stone Age savages. And yet here with this kind of ceremony, you have a moral ideal that we haven't achieved even to this day. It's very odd the way the two of them are put side by side that way. The other thing that's kind of interesting is, one of the things you see in our politics is nobody ever apologizes. When the government screws up, maybe starts an unnecessary war and gets a lot of people killed, the best you can hope for is kind of a tight-lipped thing. Well, we have to put that behind us now and move on. Mistakes were made,
Look forward.
Yeah. And, think about it. Think about something like Vietnam, where you had 50,000 bodies left lying in a field, and
Yeah.
nobody ever said they were sorry.
Mhm.
I think I've always, it would be nice if our government had a ceremony like that. You could maybe do it at the reflecting pool up front of the Washington Monument. Have all the people, who have made blundered and made a war, which has killed a bunch of people, actually have a public apology ceremony. We made a mistake. We should not have started this war. It dragged on far too long. A lot of lives were unnecessarily lost, and we want to publicly apologize for it. There's no government will ever do that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's an interesting ideal.
But and that's almost like the samurai. They if they lose a battle or lose a war, they got to fall on their own sword.
Yeah, that kind of thing. It's really a very high moral standard. The people of the city are responsible for any murder that takes place in their vicinity, even if none of them personally did it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept. Okay, that really ends the Parsha. Next week, there's a whole bunch of new laws, and starting with chapter 21, verse 10. So that's where we pick up next week.
Great. Very good, Fred.
So,
Thank you, Fred.
see you guys.
Thank you.
See you
Thank
guys
you,
You, I
next
hope
week.
you
Fred.
feel better.
Okay.
Get a little
Thank
break
you.
in the
You
weather.
too.
Okay.